In this QuoteSoft training video, you are going to learn about calculations. But first, what is the purpose of calculations? Running a calculation applies material cost and labor hours to your existing zone takeoff. Now that you understand what a calculation is, you will now be shown how to perform calculations and how to use the functions in the Calculations tab. After your zone takeoff has been completed, we must apply cost and labor values to your zone takeoff. To do so, navigate to the Calculations tab. When you first come to the Calculations tab, it will be blank. You must apply a calculation to your existing zone takeoff to establish value. To do so, we give you three calculation options: Calculate Job, Calc Selected, and Calculate by Pattern. Let's explore how you'll use these calc options to help you establish value. Since calculations apply value to existing zone takeoff, it's important to understand how to properly define zones. Training Video 2.4 Zones teaches you how to properly create and manage zones. But as a reminder, in the Zones tab, a zone is first and foremost defined by plan file. Each zone is assigned a spec defining its unique system, as well as blueprint numbers, divisions within your company, which drawings were used, and notes defining work within. Properly defining zones plays a key role in getting the most out of calculations and reports. In the Calculations tab, let's explore your first calculation option, Calculate Job. When you select Calculate Job, the program will calculate cost values and labor hours on every zone previously defined within the job. The Calculate Job option works well for establishing value on smaller projects in which you need to establish a lump sum base bid value. QuoteSoft, however, can be used for establishing more than just base bid values. The legend displayed at the bottom of the dialog box shows that QuoteSoft can be used for establishing alternates and change order values. For example, this job has both base bid zones and an additive alternate zone. For reporting purposes, base bid, alternate, and change order values must each be calculated separately. Therefore, using Calculate Job for this project will not work. Let's explore the second calculation option to help you with this scenario, and that is Calc Selected. In order to use Calc Selected, we must first navigate back to the Zones tab, where we will find in front of each zone is a selection box. By left-clicking, you can deselect and select zones. In this exercise, we will be first establishing a base bid value. To do so, we must make sure our base bid zones are selected with a check mark, and we will unselect our additive alternate zone. With just base bid zones selected, we will navigate back to the Calculations tab. Remember, Calculate Job will calculate every zone in the project. For this example, we only want to calculate the selected base bid zones. To do so, you will use Calc Selected. We have now established base bid value for materials and labor. If we now wish to establish value for our additive alternate zone, we must first deselect all of our base bid zones. We have some utilities to help you with this. With only our additive alternate zone selected, we will navigate back to the Calculations tab and again use Calc Selected, in which we can review our material costs for our additive alternate and our labor hours. The Calc Selected option works well for smaller sized projects with breakout values in which it's manageable to select and deselect zones in the list. To review, Calculate Job will be used on smaller projects in which you need to establish one lump sum base bid value. Calculate Selected will also be used on smaller projects, but projects that have breakout values from base bid. QuoteSoft, however, is not limited to smaller projects. QuoteSoft can be used for very large estimates. The third calc option, Calculate Pattern, will be used to help you with those large projects. To do so, select Calc Pattern, and you will be presented with the Selection Pattern dialog box, in which you can select a pattern of options for calculating purposes. Patterns can be selected by specs or systems, zone types, zones themselves, blueprint numbers, and divisions. As a reminder, the calculation pattern options come from the information you are to enter when creating a new zone. The more information entered in the new zone dialog box, the more calculation pattern options you will have. Any combination of options can be selected. For example, if you'd like to establish value for base bid, under zone type, simply select base bid. Selecting OK will perform the calculation. If you now wish to establish value for your additive alternate, simply select the zone type additive alternate. And again, selecting OK will perform the calculation. And lastly, if you'd like to establish value for the gas system for the plumbing scope of work on first floor, you can select that pattern by selecting the gas system spec, the first floor, zone, and the plumbing division. Before you are shown functions within the Calculations tab, let's do a final review of your three calculation options. Calculate Job will be used to establish value on every zone in the project, regardless of the zone type. This is commonly used to establish a lump sum base bid value for the entire project. Calc Selected is used to establish breakout values on smaller projects, in which it's easy to select and deselect zones in the zones list. And lastly, Calc Pattern is used to establish breakout values on large projects with many zones. Now that you understand how to establish value within the Calculations tab using the three calc options, you will be now shown functionality within the Calculations tab. After a calculation has been performed, you will be able to review and adjust material costs. You will be able to review and adjust labor hours, and you will be able to review and correct exceptions. Let's first review functionality within Material Summary. For your review, displayed is a list of materials used within the zone takeoff. Also displayed is your list price and net pricing. Please note, if you do not know how list and net prices are established, please watch training video Material Multipliers 1.3. Please understand, performing a calculation to establish value is merely a step at working towards running reports, meaning the net total cost value may not be complete. Another step may be required in order to complete the value. You can use the material summary as a review tool, validating quantities and cost values of materials. If a material's quantity or cost value appears skewed, you can highlight the material and select Detail to see a further breakdown of the material. If a mistake had been made during zone takeoff, this may be useful functionality to help you pinpoint where the mistake might have been made. Net total material pricing can also be adjusted. By selecting the Material Set pull-down menu, you can select different multiplier options, which will affect the net total cost. In addition to reviewing material pricing, labor can also be reviewed. We will now review functionality within the labor summary. For your review, displayed is a list of zones and the assemblies used in each zone. Also displayed are your base hours generated from your labor source your adjusted hours based off of your labor factor, and the job hours based off of a job factor. Please note, if you'd like to learn more about labor sources and labor factors for adjusted hours, please watch training video 1.2, Labor Factors. You can use the labor summary as a review tool validating labor hours per zone, as well as labor hours per assembly used in each zone. If the labor hours on a zone or an assembly appear skewed, you can select the zone or the assembly in the list and select Detail to see a breakdown. If a mistake had been made during zone takeoff or in an assembly's list, this might help you pinpoint where the mistake occurred. Labor factors affecting adjusted hours can be changed by selecting the pull-down menu and selecting a new labor factor. In addition to calculations generating material costs and labor hours, you will also be able to review any exceptions. To help you better understand exceptions, you'll be educated on what exceptions are and how exceptions were generated. First, what are exceptions? Exceptions in the list are items that were taken off within your zones, but the program cannot define the items and thus cannot generate cost or labor values. Secondly, it's important for you to understand how exceptions were generated. For day-to-day use of the QuoteSoft piping program, your best standard practice is to diligently work your way through each of the tabs along the top, from left to right, setting up each tab as you go. Exceptions can be generated when, after zone takeoff has been completed, one goes backwards in the tab order and changes or removes job items, assemblies, or specs. For example, this job has some zones that were assigned a domestic water spec, and in that spec was originally defined a sweat ball valve. The sweat ball valve was recorded in the zones in an audit trail entry as a sweat ball valve. If I were to go back to the Specs tab, open the domestic water spec, and change the sweat ball valve to a threaded ball valve, this will generate exceptions. If exceptions were detected during the calculation, you will hear an audio cue alerting you to exceptions, and you will see a dialog box warning you of exceptions. These cannot be ignored. You must select OK, acknowledging that you have exceptions with this job. Remember, exceptions are items that were taken off within zones. During the calculation, they could not be identified, and thus, there is no cost or labor values included in the job totals. The best way to deal with exceptions is to not have any exceptions at all. For day-to-day use, best standard practices of using QuoteSoft, simply work your way through the tabs and diligently set up each tab in a left to right order. And the next rule of thumb, once zone takeoff has been completed, do not go backwards in the tab order and change or remove specs, assemblies, or job items. Correcting exceptions is covered in Training Video 5.4, Exceptions. Or as always, if you have exceptions, please call for technical support. The last topic to discuss within the Calculations tab is the pricing options. If you utilize a pricing service, you will use the database pricing option. If you do not utilize a pricing service and wish to have each job's material list quoted on a job-by-job basis, you will use the quoted option. When selecting the quoted option, you will be prompted with a dialog box confirming that this is the pricing method you'd like to use. When a calculation has been ran with the quoted pricing option selected, all calculated materials will be populated in the Quotes tab. Please watch Training Video 6.1, Quotes, to learn how to utilize the Quotes tab. If you are utilizing a pricing service to establish material costs, but have volatile materials on a project that you would like to have quoted, you can use the Sum Quoted option. You will then be prompted with a dialog box confirming you would like to use the Sum Quoted option. You will then be prompted with a second dialog box in which you must select the materials you'd like to have quoted for this job. To do so, select the Add button and select the materials that you'd like to have quoted before selecting OK. And after the materials you'd like to be quoted are selected, please select Close and Yes to save changes. Thank you for watching this training video on calculations.